teenager and 2 men are dead after being shot in East Macon over the weekend. It happened in the 500 block of William Street just before 10:30 Saturday night.
According to the Bibb County Sheriff's Office, Macon-Bibb E911 got a call about a person shot. They say 27-year-old Quintarius Townsend was found at the scene and taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. The Sheriff's Office said deputies then got an additional call and responded to the same area where they found 16-year-old Markel Bonner Jr. and 21-year-old Brandon Thomas unresponsive with gunshot wounds. They died at the scene. The shootings remain under investigation. Call the Bibb County Sheriff's Office or Macon Regional Crime Stoppers if you have information.
On the night of August 18th, 2025, the quiet streets of East Macon, Georgia erupted into chaos. Over 50 gunshots tore through the darkness, sharp, relentless, echoing off apartment buildings like thunder trapped in a valley. Witnesses would later say it sounded like a war zone. Some thought fireworks. Others knew better. By the time the smoke cleared and the sirens faded, 3 young men lay dead, 2 brothers, a friend. Blood pooled on the pavement of East William Street, a neighborhood already scarred by violence, but never quite like this. This wasn't a single shot in the heat of an argument. This was calculated. This was revenge. But here's where this story takes a turn that shook an entire county to its core. 5 weeks later, authorities issued a wanted poster, not for a hardened criminal, not for a known gang member, but for a 21-year-old woman who, just 4 years earlier, had walked across a stage in cap and gown, graduating with honors. A young woman whose mother had posted proudly on Facebook about her dedication, her late night studying, her refusal to give up despite unimaginable loss. A young woman who had turned her life around after a difficult childhood, only to now be named as a person of interest in a triple homicide. Her name is Rekeymia, and the questions surrounding her case are as dark as they are complicated. Was she involved in the shooting? Did she set those 3 men up? Or is she simply guilty by association? A young woman who made the fatal mistake of lending her car to the wrong person on the wrong night? Some in the community are praying she's found alive. Others are praying she's caught. The families of the victims want justice. The streets are talking. And somewhere out there, Rekeymia is running or hiding, knowing that when she's found, the truth will finally come to light. Welcome to Dark Truth Files. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Drop your location in the comments. And also don't forget to like and subscribe to Dark Truth Files for more real stories. This is a case about choices, about how quickly a life can spiral, about how violence breeds violence, and how retaliation in small southern towns doesn't just claim lives, it shatters entire families, entire futures. Rekeymia story isn't just about one night of gunfire. It's about generational trauma, about a young woman who grew up without a father, who watched her mother fight to survive, who clawed her way towards something better, only to allegedly become entangled in the very darkness she'd once escaped. But let's be clear, 3 men are dead. Quintarius Townsend, 27 years old. Brandon Thomas, 21. Markel Bonner Jr., just 16. They had families. They had futures. And on that Saturday night, those futures were stolen in a hail of bullets that neighbors say felt like it would never stop. This case has everything. Gang rivalries, retaliation, a young woman caught in the crossfire of loyalty and law, a community torn between sympathy and anger, and at the center of it all, a question that haunts everyone involved. How does someone go from honor roll to wanted for murder? In this video, we're going to break down everything we know, the victims, the crime, the investigation, the theories swirling through barbershops and hair salons across Macon, the boyfriend who vanished from social media, the car that allegedly carried killers to their target, and a young woman now facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. Because this isn't just another true crime story. This is a story about Macon, Georgia, a city split between hope and despair, where violence has become so normalized that even a shooting with 50 shell casings barely surprises people anymore. It's a story about how quickly dreams can die, and how sometimes the people we least expect become the ones wanted by police.
I'm Maggie Fitzgerald. New tonight, neighbors in East Macon described the moment they heard dozens of gunshots ring out Saturday night. Witnesses tell us the gunfire sounded like an automatic weapon. Some say they heard two separate rounds of shots about an hour apart. Hunter King shares more after speaking with people who live nearby.
Neighbors here in East Macon off of William Street tell me that they are shocked, not by the shooting itself, but just the severity of it all. Investigators say dozens of shots rang out on Saturday night shooting that claimed the lives of 3 men. And here on Sunday afternoon, those same investigators are trying to figure out what led up to the shooting. The Bibb County Sheriff's Office identifies the victims as 27-year-old Quintarius Townsend, 21-year-old Brandon Thomas, and 16-year-old Markel Bonner Jr. Deputies responded to the 500 block of William Street just before 11 p.m. on Saturday night. Diane Jolly lives down the road, and she heard the gunfire.
I was in bed, and I thought maybe it was some firecrackers or something, because it said pow, 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 pow. And I'm like, what in the world? And then about an hour or so later, he did the same thing. Pow, 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 pow.
Jolly says the neighborhood was quiet when she moved here nearly 4 years ago. She described a different scene now.
It really is scary for me to be an older person, and it's like he kind of scary because them bullets ain't got no name, or they can come to anybody's apartment or anyone and shoot, hurt them. It's sad.
Our crews first on the scene Saturday night counted at least 50 shell casings at the scene. Witnesses who spoke to us off camera say gang activity is frequent in the neighborhood. One witness tells us this shooting may be connected to a previous incident, but the sheriff's office has not confirmed that link. Deputies found 2 victims dead at the scene. Townsend died at the hospital. We reached out to the sheriff's office for an interview, but they declined.
At 27 years old, Quintavious was the oldest of the 3 victims. He was a young man trying to navigate life in a city where opportunities were scarce and violence was common. Those who knew him described him as someone who was always around, always present in the neighborhood. East Macon was his home, the streets he grew up on, the people he grew up with. Like so many young men in Macon, Quintavious existed in a world where loyalty meant everything, where your crew was your family, and where disrespect could cost you your life. But he was more than just a product of his environment. He was a son, a brother, a friend, the kind of person who showed up when you needed him. His death hit the community hard, not just because of how violently he was taken, but because at 27 he still had time to change his path, time to build something different, time that was stolen in seconds. Then there's Brandon Thomas. Brandon was 21 years old, the same age as Rekeymia Henley, the woman now wanted in connection with his death. That's a detail that stings when you think about it. 2 young people, the same age, their lives intersecting in the most tragic way possible. Brandon was one of 2 brothers who died that night, and his loss left a family shattered. He wasn't just a statistic. He wasn't just another name on a growing list of homicides in Bibb County. Brandon was somebody's son, somebody's brother. He had a life ahead of him, dreams he hadn't yet fulfilled, people who loved him and believed in him. And in the span of minutes, all of that was erased. His family would later speak about the pain of losing not just one son, but 2, both taken in the same act of violence, both gone before they ever had a real chance to escape the cycle that had claimed so many before them. And then there's Markel Bonner Jr., 16 years old. Let that sink in for a moment. 16, still a child in so many ways, still figuring out who he was, what he wanted, where he was going. Markel was Brandon's younger brother, and on that Saturday night, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps he was exactly where his brother was, and that's what cost him his life. At 16, Markel should have been worried about school, about girls, about what he was going to do after graduation. Instead, he became another young black boy whose life was cut short by gun violence in a small southern city where that's become far too common. His death is perhaps the most heartbreaking of the 3, because Markel still had innocence. He still had a chance to choose a different path. But that choice was ripped away from him in a storm of bullets that didn't discriminate, didn't pause, didn't care that he was just a kid. The community mourned all three, but Markiel's death struck a particularly painful chord. Parents across East Macon held their own children a little tighter that week. Because if a 16-year-old could be gunned down in his own neighborhood, then no one was safe. These three young men, Quantavius, Brandon, and Markiel, weren't perfect. They lived in a world where survival sometimes meant making choices that outsiders don't understand, where gang affiliations weren't always about violence, but about belonging, about protection, about having people who would ride for you when no one else would. But they were human. They laughed. They had families who loved them. They had mothers who prayed for them, siblings who looked up to them, friends who would never forget them. And on August 18, 2025, all three of them were taken in an act of violence so brutal, so excessive, that it left an entire community reeling. Over 50 shots fired, 2 separate rounds of gunfire, about an hour apart. Witnesses said it sounded like an automatic weapon, relentless, unforgiving, designed not just to kill but to send a message. The first call came at around 10:30 p.m. Quantavius had been shot. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it. 30 minutes later, deputies responded to another call just down the block. Brandon and Markiel were found suffering from gunshot wounds. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. 3 funerals, 3 families destroyed, 3 lives that mattered, reduced to case numbers and news headlines. In the days that followed, their loved ones gathered to mourn. Candlelight vigils were held. Tears were shed. Anger boiled over. Because this wasn't just another shooting in Macon. This was personal. This was a massacre. And everyone knew it wasn't random. The streets started talking immediately. People knew why it happened. They knew who had beef with whom. They knew about the ongoing feuds between crews, about the retaliation cycle that had been building for months, maybe years. They knew this was payback. But knowing and proving are 2 different things. And for 5 long weeks, as investigators combed through evidence and chased down leads, no arrests were made. The families of Quantavius, Brandon, and Markiel waited. They demanded justice. They deserved answers. And when those answers finally started to come, they arrived in the form of a name no one expected. Rekeymia, a 21-year-old woman, an honor roll graduate, someone who, on the surface, seemed like the last person who would be connected to a triple homicide. But as we're about to see, in Macon, Georgia, things are never quite what they seem. August 18th, 2025 started like any other Saturday in East Macon. The summer heat hung heavy in the air, thick and oppressive even as the sun began to set. Kids played outside while adults sat on porches, trying to catch whatever breeze they could. Music drifted from open windows. The smell of barbecue mixed with the exhaust from cars rolling slowly down the street. East Macon is a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, where generations of families have lived side by side, watching each other's children grow up, attending the same churches, shopping at the same corner stores. It's a community bound by shared history and shared struggle, a place where people look out for each other because they have to, but it's also a place where violence has become woven into the fabric of daily life, where gunshots are sometimes mistaken for fireworks, where young men move carefully, always aware of who's watching, always conscious of invisible boundaries that separate one crew's territory from another's. On this particular Saturday, tensions were already high. Those who lived in the neighborhood knew that there had been problems brewing for weeks, maybe months. Beef between rival groups. Disrespect that had gone unanswered. The kind of simmering conflict that, in places like East Macon, doesn't just fade away, it explodes. As darkness fell and the streetlights flickered on, East William Street seemed quiet, deceptively peaceful. Families were settling in for the night. Some people were heading out to parties or clubs. Others were just trying to make it through another weekend in the city, where survival sometimes feels like an accomplishment in itself. Quantavius Townsend was somewhere on East William Street that evening. So were Brandon Thomas and his younger brother Markiel. Whether they were together from the start or met up later, We may never know all the details. What we do know is that they were in their own neighborhood, a place they walked 1,000 times before, surrounded by people and places they knew. They had no idea what was coming. Around 10:30 p.m., the night shattered. The first shots rang out sharp, explosive cracks that cut through the humid air like thunder. One witness later said she was lying in bed when she heard it. At first, she thought maybe it was fireworks. It was Saturday night, after all. People celebrate. But something about the sound didn't sit right. It was too sustained, too aggressive, too deliberate. Pop, 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 she described it. A rapid succession of gunfire that seemed to go on forever. And then silence. Quantavious Townsend had been hit. Multiple times. The bullets tore through him with devastating force, leaving him bleeding out on the pavement. Neighbors who heard the shots were too afraid to come outside. Some called 911. Others stayed inside, hearts pounding, praying the violence wouldn't reach their doorsteps. Emergency services arrived within minutes, sirens wailing as they raced down East William Street. Quantavious was rushed to a local hospital, medics working frantically to save his life. But the damage was too severe. At 27 years old, Quantavious Townsend was pronounced dead, the first victim. But the night wasn't over. For about an hour, the neighborhood held its breath. Police were on the scene, investigating the shooting. Yellow crime scene tape went up. Officers interviewed witnesses, searched for shell casings, tried to piece together what had happened. Some residents venture outside, whispering to each other, speculating about who did it and why. East William Street felt like a powder keg. Everyone could sense it. This wasn't finished. And they were right. Around 11 p.m., roughly 30 minutes after Quantavious was shot, the gunfire erupted again. This time, it was even worse. Witnesses described it as sounding like an automatic weapon, a relentless barrage of shots that seemed to pour into the 500 block of East William Street without mercy, over and over and over. The sound was deafening, terrifying, inescapable. People dove to the floor. Parents threw themselves over their children. The elderly clutched their chests, praying they wouldn't die from a stray bullet tearing through their walls. It was like a war zone, one neighbor would later say. I've heard gunshots before, but nothing like that. It just kept going and going. Diane Jolly, who lived down the road, was in bed when the second round of shots began. She described the moment with the kind of detail that only comes from genuine trauma. The way the sound made her freeze. The way she couldn't tell if it was coming from right outside her window or down the block. The way her mind raced through possibilities. Was it fireworks? Backfire from a car? And then the sickening realization. Someone was shooting. A lot. About an hour or so later, they did the same thing, she recalled. Pow, pow, pow. When the shooting finally stopped, deputies were already on their way. Multiple 911 calls had flooded in, all reporting the same thing. Heavy gunfire in the 500 block of East William Street. Officers arrived to find a scene of absolute carnage. Brandon Thomas, 21 years old, was lying motionless, his body riddled with bullets. He never had a chance. Next to him was his younger brother, Markeel Bonner Jr., just 16 years old, also shot multiple times. Also dead, two brothers, killed together, their blood mixing on the pavement of the street where they grew up. Both were pronounced dead at the scene. The responding officers were no strangers to violence. Macon had seen its share of shootings, of young lives lost to gang disputes and retaliation. But even for seasoned law enforcement, this was extreme. The sheer volume of gunfire, the brutality of it, the fact that 3 people had been killed in what appeared to be 2 separate but related attacks. As investigators began processing the scene, the scale of what happened became even clearer. Shell casings littered the ground. Over 50 of them, scattered across the pavement like deadly confetti. The crime scene stretched across multiple blocks, evidence of just how chaotic and widespread the shooting had been. 2 weapons were recovered at the scene. One was a handgun, common enough in street violence, but the other was an AK-47 style rifle, often called a Draco in street terminology. This was a kind of weapon that could fire rapidly, that could unleash the kind of sustained gunfire witnesses had described. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't someone losing their temper and pulling a trigger in the heat of the moment. This was planned. This was an execution. This was retaliation. Throughout the night, investigators worked under harsh floodlights, photographing evidence, collecting casings, interviewing anyone willing to talk. Bibb County Coroner Leon Jones arrived to examine the bodies. The medical examiner would later determine the exact cause of death for each victim, but it didn't take an expert to see what had happened. These young men had been gunned down with extreme prejudice. By Sunday morning, the news had spread throughout Macon. Social media was buzzing. People were posting tributes to the victims, expressing shock and grief, demanding answers. News crews descended on East William Street, filming stand-ups in front of the crime scene tape, interviewing neighbors who were willing to speak on camera. Diane Jolly spoke to reporters, her voice shaking as she described what she'd heard. "It's kind of scary because them bullets ain't got no name," she said. "They can come to anybody's apartment or anyone and shoot or hurt them. You know it's sad." Another neighbor echoed the sentiment, describing how the neighborhood had changed over the years. What was once a quiet area had become a place where violence felt inevitable, where parents feared for their children, where the sound of gunshots no longer shocked people the way it should. "It really is scary for me to be an older person," one woman said, her voice heavy with resignation and fear. District 3 Commissioner Stanley Stewart spoke out about the shooting, calling it a tragedy that was tearing the community apart. He emphasized that the violence wasn't coming from outside the neighborhood. It was internal, a cycle of retaliation and revenge that kept claiming lives. He called on churches and schools to get involved, to help break the pattern before more young people died. "When you get people together willing to share, the world gets awfully small," Stewart said. "And that's when we're able to close cases and make arrests." But getting people to share information is easier said than done in communities where snitching can get you killed, where loyalty to your crew trumps cooperation with police, where fear keeps mouths shut even when people know exactly who pulled the trigger. Authorities urged anyone with information to come forward. They set up tip lines. They put up Crime Stopper signs. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking questions, trying to piece together the sequence of events. But for weeks, no arrests were made. The families of Quantavius, Brandon, and Markeel held funerals. They buried their loved ones. They cried. They raged. They demanded justice. And while they mourned, the streets kept talking. Because here's the thing about neighborhoods like East Macon. People always know more than they're willing to tell police. In barbershops and hair salons, on street corners, and in living rooms, the conversation was already happening. People knew this was gang-related. They knew about the ongoing beef between rival crews. They knew about a group allegedly called EBK and the enemies they'd made. Witnesses who spoke off-camera to news crews confirmed what many already suspected. The shooting was connected to previous violence. It was payback for something that had happened before. The cycle of retaliation that had plagued Macon for years had claimed 3 more victims. But here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. As investigators dug deeper, as they followed leads and chased down tips, they began to focus on something specific. A vehicle that had allegedly been seen in the area around the time of the shootings. A car that witnesses said had rolled through the neighborhood, possibly during both rounds of gunfire. And when they traced that vehicle, the name that came back shocked everyone. Not a known gang member. Not someone with a long criminal history. Not one of the usual suspects that police had been watching. The car allegedly belonged to Rekeymia Henley, a 21-year-old woman who had graduated with honors just 4 years earlier. A young woman whose mother had proudly posted about her dedication to education, her late-night studying, her determination to succeed despite a traumatic childhood. How did someone like that end up connected to a triple homicide that looked like a gang execution? That's the question that would consume Macon for the next 5 weeks. And the answer, when it finally started to emerge, would reveal just how complicated and how tragic this case really was. Because on that Saturday night in August, when over 50 shots rang out on East William Street, when 3 young men lost their lives in a hail of bullets, Rekeymia Henley's name wasn't anywhere near the investigation, but her car allegedly was. And in the world of criminal investigations, that's often all it takes to change everything. The night of August 18th, 2025 will be remembered in East Macon for a long time. 3 families were destroyed. A community was traumatized. And somewhere in the chaos and violence of that night, a young woman's life changed forever, whether she pulled a trigger or not. Because when the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted and the shell casings were collected, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. For 5 weeks after the shooting, Bibb County investigators worked quietly. They processed evidence. They interviewed witnesses. They followed leads that took them deep into the world of gang rivalries and street justice that most people in Macon knew existed, but rarely talk about openly. And while they worked, the community simmered with speculation. Everyone had theories. Everyone thought they knew what happened. In the barbershops, men debated who had the motive, who had the means, who had the audacity to carry out such a brazen attack. In hair salons, women whispered about connections and relationships, about who was dating whom, about whose car had been seen where. The streets always know before the police announce anything. That's just how it works in tight-knit communities where information travels faster through text messages and social media than through official channels. But even with all the street talk, even with all the theories and rumors, no one expected the name that would eventually surface as a person of interest. Rekeymia Henley, when her wanted poster went up on Thursday, October 23rd, 2025, more than 2 months after murders, it sent shockwaves through Macon. Social media exploded. People who knew her from high school couldn't believe it. Teachers who had watched her graduate with honors were stunned. Friends and family members found themselves caught between disbelief and a horrible realization that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. The poster described her as 21 years old, 5'6", weighing 135 pounds, with brown hair and black eyes. It noted that she had braces and tattoos along her right arm and thigh. Her photograph showed a young woman who looked like she could be anybody's daughter, anybody's sister, anybody's friend. But according to investigators, her vehicle had allegedly been used in connection with a triple homicide. So the question everyone was asking was simple. How? To understand how Rekeymia Henley ended up one of her 3 murders, you have to understand the landscape of gang violence in Macon, Georgia. You have to understand how retaliation works, how quickly things escalate, how one act of disrespect or violence leads to another and another until bodies start dropping and nobody even remembers what started it all. According to sources and information that circulated on social media, information that has not been officially confirmed by authorities but aligns with what investigators believe. The shooting on August 18th wasn't random. It was payback. The victims, Quantavious Townsend, Brandon Thomas, and Markeel Bonner Jr., were allegedly affiliated with crew or group in East Macon. Like many young men in urban areas, their association with this group was part protection, part brotherhood, part survival strategy. In neighborhoods where opportunities are scarce and dangers are many, these affiliations become family. But they also make you a target. According to the theory that investigators were working with, there have been ongoing tensions between this group and a rival crew that some identified as EBK. The exact nature of the beef isn't entirely clear. It could have been territorial disputes, personal conflicts, disrespect that went unanswered, or violence that demanded retaliation. Whatever the origin, by August 2025, things had reached a boiling point. And that's where Rekeymia Henley allegedly enters the picture, not as a shooter, not as someone who pulled a trigger or planned an execution, but as someone who was connected to the wrong person at the wrong time. According to information that spread through social media and street sources, Rekeymia was dating someone, a young man who was allegedly affiliated with a crew that had beef with the victims. This young man, whose name has not been officially released by authorities, was supposedly active on social media in the weeks leading up to the shooting. In fact, public videos showed him celebrating Rekeymia's birthday just 2 years prior, calling her his girlfriend and his wife, posting about their relationship with the kind of public affection that young couples often display online. But after the shooting on August 18th, something changed. He went silent. His social media activity, which had been regular and visible, suddenly stopped. The last posts anyone could find from him were from the week before the murders, and that silence spoke volumes. Because in the world of street justice and criminal investigations, disappearing from social media right after a major crime isn't coincidence. It's strategy. It's someone going to ground, laying low, knowing that police and rivals alike are looking for them. According to the theories circulating in Macon, this young man, Rekeymia's alleged boyfriend, was one of the shooters who carried out the attack on East William Street. And the reason investigators were able to connect him to the crime was through Rekeymia vehicle. Her car had allegedly been used during the shooting. Whether she was in it or not, whether she knew it was going to happen or not, whether she willingly handed over the keys or not, those questions remain unanswered. But her car being connected to a crime scene where 3 people were murdered was enough to make her a person of interest. And in some people's eyes, it was enough to make her guilty. Let's break down what likely happened based on the evidence and theories that have emerged. In the weeks leading up to August 18th, tensions between the rival groups had been escalating. There may have been a previous incident, a shooting, a fight, some act of disrespect or violence that demanded retaliation. In street culture, letting something like that slide is seen as weakness. It invites more violence. It puts your crew at risk. So someone decided to respond. The attack was planned with disturbing precision. 2 weapons, a handgun and an AK-47 style rifle, multiple shooters, based on the pattern of shell casings and the 2 separate rounds of fire, a vehicle to get them to and from the scene quickly. That vehicle, investigators believe, was Rekeymia's. On the night of August 18th, the shooters allegedly rolled through East William Street in Rekeymia car. The first attack targeted Quantavious Townsend around 10:30 p.m. He was shot multiple times and later died at the hospital. But the shooters weren't done. About an hour later, they came back. This time, they unleashed a devastating barrage of gunfire that killed Brandon Thomas and Marquil Bonner Jr. on the spot. Over 50 shell casings were left behind, evidence of the sheer volume and intensity of the attack. Witnesses described hearing what sounded like automatic weapons fire, the kind of sustained shooting that requires not just one person, but likely multiple people coordinating. Someone driving, someone or multiple people, shooting from a vehicle, and then they were gone, disappearing into the night, while the neighborhood reeled from the violence. In the immediate aftermath, investigators had very little to go on. No one was talking. Fear kept witnesses silent. Even people who saw the vehicle couldn't, or wouldn't, provide details that would lead to immediate arrests. But forensic evidence doesn't lie. Shell casings can be traced to specific weapons. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses or homes can capture license plates. Cell phone data can place people at specific locations at specific times. And slowly, piece by piece, investigators began to build their case. When they identified Rekeymia vehicle as being connected to the crime scene, they started looking into her background. They discovered her relationship with the young man who had gone silent on social media. They learned about his alleged affiliations with a rival crew. They began to construct a theory about what happened and who was involved. But here's where things get complicated and tragic. By all accounts, Rekeymia herself was not a shooter. She didn't pull any triggers. She may not have even been in the car when the murders happened. The theory that gained the most traction on social media was that she had simply lent her car to her boyfriend, either not knowing what he planned to do or feeling unable to refuse. In some versions of the story circulating in Macon, people suggested she was used. that her boyfriend and possibly others took advantage of her vehicle to carry out their attack, knowing it wouldn't immediately be connected to them the way their own cars might have been. Other, darker theories suggested she set up the victims, that she somehow lured them to location or provided information that made the attack possible. But as of now, there's no evidence to support that claim. It appears to be speculation, the kind of narrative that emerges when people are searching for answers and filling in gaps with assumptions. What seems most likely, based on the available information, is that Rekeymia found herself caught in the worst possible position, connected to a crime through her relationship and her vehicle, but not necessarily culpable in the way that the actual shooters were. But in the eyes of the law, that distinction might not matter as much as it should. If her car was used in the commission of a triple homicide, if she knew or should have known what it was being used for, if she helped in any way, even just by handing over keys, she could potentially face serious charges: accessory to murder, conspiracy, felony murder, which in many states means that anyone involved in a felony that results in death can be charged with murder regardless of who pulled the trigger. That's the legal reality Rekeymia is facing. And it's why, 2 months after the shooting, authorities issued a wanted poster with her face on it. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more complex: the danger Rekeymia herself may now be in. According to sources in Macon, both sides of the conflict now potentially have reasons to want Rekeymia silenced. The families of the victims want justice, and some may believe she's just as guilty as whoever pulled the trigger. They see her as complicit, as someone who helped murder their loved ones. But the other side, the crew allegedly responsible for shooting, may also see her as a liability. If she's arrested, if she decides to cooperate with authorities, if she provides information about who was actually in that car and who fired those shots, she could bring down multiple people. And in the world of street justice, snitching is unforgivable. So Rekeymia finds herself in a nightmare scenario: wanted by police, potentially at risk from the victims' families, and possibly considered a threat by the very people she's connected to. Some in the community are praying she turns herself in safely. Others are praying she's found before she can disappear completely. And everyone is waiting to see what will happen when she's finally apprehended, because investigators have made it clear that they believe more arrests are coming. The young man believed to be her boyfriend hasn't been named or charged yet, but his silence on social media, his disappearance from public view, and his alleged connection to the shooting suggests he knows exactly how much trouble he's in. Other potential accomplices may also be out there, lying low, hoping the investigation doesn't reach them. But in cases like this, someone eventually talks. Someone gets scared. Someone cuts a deal. And when that happens, the whole story comes tumbling out. The motive for the shooting seems clear: retaliation. An ongoing beef between crews that escalated until 3 young men were dead. The kind of cycle of violence has plagued cities like Macon for decades, where every act of violence demands another, where backing down is seen as weakness, where young men feel they have no choice but to ride for their crew even if it costs them their lives or their freedom. What remains unclear is exactly what role Rekeymia played. Was she a willing participant? Did she know what was going to happen? Was she manipulated or coerced? Or was she simply in love with the wrong person and made a catastrophic mistake? Those questions will likely be answered in court. If she's found alive, if she's brought in safely, if the full truth ever comes to light. But for now, all anyone knows for certain is this: 3 young men are dead. A 21-year-old woman with a promising future is wanted by police, and a community is left to grapple with yet another tragedy in a long line of tragedies that seem to have no end. The streets of Macon keep talking. The investigation keeps moving forward. And somewhere out there, Rekeymia Henley is either running or hiding, knowing that her life will never be the same. But here's where this story takes a turn that makes it even more heartbreaking and more complicated than anyone initially realized. To understand the full weight of what Rekeymia Henley is facing, you have to understand where she came from. Because this isn't just a story about a young woman wanted for a triple murder. This is a story about generational trauma, about cycles of violence that repeat themselves in ways that are almost too painful to acknowledge. Rekeymia. Henley didn't grow up in a stable, peaceful home. She grew up in the shadow of violence that had already claimed her father's life before she was old enough to remember him. Her father's name was Jesse Gerald Henley. He was 28 years old when he died, younger than his daughter is now as she runs from police. And the person who killed him was the person who was supposed to love him most, Rekeymya's mother, Corinthia Henley. It happened on a Sunday morning in 2009. Rekeymia was just 2 years old. According to police reports from that time, Corinthia and Jesse got into an argument at their home around 5:45 a.m. What started as a verbal dispute escalated quickly. Jesse, according to Corinthia's account to police, began beating her. He pushed her face into a pan of hot grease that was warming on the stove. In that moment of violence and terror, Corinthia reached for a kitchen knife, and she stabbed her husband. Jesse Gerald Henley bled out and died from his wounds. Corinthia called the police. When officers arrived, they found a domestic violence scene that had turned deadly. Corinthia's face bore the marks of assault. The evidence supported her claim of self-defense. The case was labeled justifiable homicide. No charges were filed. The investigation was eventually closed. But here's the twist that makes this story even darker. This wasn't Corinthia's first time stabbing someone. Court records show that back in 1999, 10 years before she killed her husband, Corinthia Johnson, her maiden name, had stabbed a man. She pleaded guilty on November 29, 1999, and was sentenced in March 2000 to serve 3 years in prison followed by 7 years of probation. She came home from prison in 2003. The following year, 2004, she gave birth to Rekeymia. 5 years later, she killed Rekeymya's father with a kitchen knife. Think about that timeline. Think about what that means for a child growing up in that environment. Rekeymya's mother had a history of violence. Her father was killed by her mother when she was 2 years old. She grew up knowing, or eventually learning, that the woman who raised her had taken the life of the man who helped create her. What does that do to a child's psyche? How does that shape your understanding of love, of conflict, of violence, of survival? And yet, despite all of that trauma, despite growing up in a single-parent home marked by violence and loss, Rekeymia tried to break the cycle. Her mother, to her credit, pushed her daughter toward a better life. That Facebook post from April 2020, when Rekeymia was in high school, paints a picture of a young woman who was determined to succeed despite everything working against her. Rekeymia had initially attended Westside High School, but something went wrong. Her mother described it as a mishap that almost cost her her future. What exactly happened isn't clear, but it was serious enough that Rekeymia had to transfer schools. She ended up at Northeast High School, a more structured environment where students wore uniforms and weren't allowed to have their phones. Less distractions, stricter rules, a better chance at focusing on education rather than the chaos of street life. And Rekeymia committed. Her mother described how she gave up wearing her own fashionable clothes, something most teenagers would rebel against, in order to attend a school with a dress code. She stayed late every day, from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. She attended tutoring sessions. She was glued to that laptop, studying, working, pushing herself towards something better. Her mother wrote, "Won't eat 2020, assuring her education as success." And okay, yes, for a teenager that's considered a boring life, but I promise it's going to pay off. And it did pay off. In May 2021, Rekeymia Henley graduated from Northeast High School with honors. Local news covered it. Her mother posted about it proudly. For a moment, it looked like Rekeymia had beaten the odds. She had overcome a traumatic childhood, a difficult adolescence, and was positioned to build a future that didn't involve violence or tragedy. She was 17 when she graduated, the same age many kids are when they're just starting to figure out who they want to be. But somewhere between graduation in 2021 and August 2025, things went wrong. Maybe it was the environment. Macon, Georgia isn't a city overflowed with opportunities for young people. Jobs are scarce. Poverty is high. The temptation to get involved in street life for money, for protection, for belonging is strong. Maybe it was a relationship. Falling in love with someone involved in gang activity can pull you into a world you never intended to enter. Loyalty to a partner can make you do things you never thought you'd do. Or maybe it was something deeper. Maybe growing up in the shadow of violence, knowing your mother killed your father, watching your community tear itself apart. Maybe all of that creates a numbness, a sense that violence is just part of life, that tragedy is inevitable. Whatever the reasons, by August 2025, Rekeymia Henley's life had taken a devastating turn. And now comes the most chilling part of this investigation. What authorities believe about the scope of this case. When the wanted poster went up for Rekeymia on October 23, 2025, investigators made it clear that they expected more arrests to follow. This wasn't just about one person. This was about multiple people involved in planning and carrying out a triple homicide. The young man believed to be Rekeymia's boyfriend, the one who went silent on social media after the shooting, is almost certainly on investigators' radar. His disappearance from public view suggests he knows he's being looked at. His connection to Rekeymia and his alleged affiliation with the crew believed to be responsible for the shooting make him a prime suspect. But there may be others. Multiple shooters would have been needed to fire over 50 shots from 2 different weapons. Someone had to drive. Someone had to plan the attack. Someone had to know where the victims would be. And that raises another disturbing possibility. Was there someone on the inside? Did someone close to the victims provide information that made the attack possible? That's the theory that some people in Macon have latched onto. The idea that Rekeymia set up the victims, that she somehow lured them to that location, or provided information about their whereabouts. It would explain why she's wanted as more than just someone whose car was used. It would make her not just an accessory, but an active participant in the murders. But there's no concrete evidence to support that theory. It could just be the kind of speculation that emerges when people are trying to make sense of something senseless, when they're looking for someone to blame. What is clear is that Rekeymia is in serious danger from multiple directions. First, there's a legal danger. If she's caught and charged with involvement in a triple homicide, she's looking at potentially spending the rest of her life in prison. Even if she wasn't a shooter, even if her only crime was letting someone use her car, the charges could be devastating. In many states, anyone who aids or assists in a felony that results in death can be charged with murder under felony murder rules. Second, there's a danger from the victims' families and their associates. 3 families lost loved ones in that shooting. The pain and anger they're feeling is unimaginable. And in communities where official justice often feels slow or inadequate, street justice becomes tempting. There are people in Macon who believe Rekeymia is just as guilty as whoever pulled the trigger, and they want her to pay. Third, and perhaps most terrifying, there's a danger from the people she's allegedly connected to. If Rekeymia gets arrested and decides to cooperate with authorities, if she starts naming names and providing details about who was actually in that car, who pulled the triggers, who planned the attack, she could bring down multiple people. And in street culture, that makes her a liability. Snitching is considered the ultimate betrayal. It doesn't matter if you're facing life in prison. It doesn't matter if cooperating could save you. The code says you stay silent. You take your charge. You protect the crew. If Rekeymia breaks that code, or if people even think she might, her life could be at risk from the very people she's allegedly trying to protect. So she's caught in an impossible situation. Turn herself in and face potentially life-destroying legal consequences. Stay on the run and risk being hunted by both law enforcement and street justice. Cooperate and become a target for retaliation. Stay silent and face the full weight of the charges alone. For a 21-year-old woman who once represented the best of what her community could produce, an honor roll graduate, a young person who had overcome incredible trauma to build something better, this is an unimaginable fall. And it raises questions that go far beyond the single case. How many other young people in cities like Macon are one bad relationship, one bad decision, one wrong place at the wrong time away from throwing their entire lives away? How many talented, intelligent, promising young people get sucked into cycles of violence not because they're bad people, but because the systems and circumstances around them make it almost impossible to escape? How many Rekeymiyas are out there right now, trying to balance education and ambition with the brutal realities of neighborhoods where violence is normalized and opportunities are scarce? The investigation into the August 18th murders continues. Bibb County investigators are actively searching for Rekeymia Henley. They're also building cases against other suspects. They've made it clear that they believe this was a planned retaliation attack, and they're determined to bring everyone involved to justice. But justice is complicated when you're dealing with generational trauma, systemic poverty, and cycles of violence that have been repeating for decades. Rekeymiyah's mother killed her father in what was ruled self-defense. Now Rekeymia is wanted in connection with 3 murders. That's not coincidence. That's pattern. That's what happens when violence becomes woven into the fabric of family history. When children grow up watching the adults around them resort to deadly force to solve problems. Breaking those patterns requires more than just arresting people after crimes happen. It requires addressing the root causes, the poverty, the lack of opportunity, the normalization of violence, the gang structures that become surrogate family for young people who feel they have nowhere else to belong. But those are big, systemic problems. And right now, investigators are focused on a more immediate concern: finding Rekeymia Henley before something terrible happens to her, or before she disappears completely. As of now, she remains at large. Her whereabouts are unknown. She could be in Macon, hiding with friends or family who are protecting her. She could have fled to another city, trying to disappear into anonymity. She could be scared, confused, unsure what to do or who to trust. Or she could be planning her next move, knowing that when she's finally found, the real story, the complete truth about what happened on August 18th, will finally come to light. The families of Quantaries Townsend, Brandon Thomas, and Markel Bonner Jr. are still waiting for that truth. They're still waiting for justice. They buried their loved ones weeks ago, but the pain hasn't faded. If anything, it's gotten worse as time passes without arrest, without answers, without accountability. They deserve to know who killed their sons, their brothers, their family members. They deserve to see everyone responsible held accountable. But they also probably wonder how a 21-year-old honor roll graduate ended up wanted in connection with their loved one's murders. They probably wonder what could have been done differently, what systems failed, what warning signs were missed. Because this case isn't just about crime and punishment. It's about all the things that led to this moment. All the choices and circumstances and traumas that put Rekeymia Henley on that wanted poster. And as investigators close in, as more pieces of the puzzle come together, the full scope of what happened on August 18th and why will finally be revealed. As of today, Rekeymia Henley remains a fugitive. Her wanted poster still circulates on social media, shared and reshared by people across Macon and beyond. The Bibb County Sheriff's Office continues to ask for the public's help in locating her. Anyone with information is urged to call 478-751-7500 or Macon Regional Crime Stoppers at 1-877-68-CRIME. But in the weeks since that poster went up, there's been no public update on her whereabouts. No arrest, no surrender, just silence. The kind of silence that suggests either she's gotten very good at hiding or people who know where she is are choosing to protect her. That silence is deafening for the families of Quantaries Townsend, Brandon Thomas, and Markel Bonner Jr. Every day that passes without an arrest is another day without answers, another day without justice, another day of wondering who pulled the trigger, who planned the attack, who is responsible for stealing their loved ones from them in such a brutal, senseless way. The pain these families are experiencing is unimaginable. Losing someone to violence is traumatic enough, but losing them in a mass shooting in their own neighborhood, with no immediate arrests, that compounds a grief of frustration, anger, and a desperate need for accountability. Quanterius' family remembers him as someone who was always present, always loyal to his people. At 27, he still had so much life ahead of him, so many opportunities to change his path, to build something different, to become something more than another statistic in Macon's rising homicide rate. Brandon Thomas's family lost a 21-year-old son with his whole future still unwritten. He was the same age as Rekeymia Henley, two young people whose lives intersected in the most tragic way imaginable. One dead, one wanted for his murder, both victims, in different ways, of the violence that has consumed their community. And then there's the Bonner family, who lost 16-year-old Markel, just a child really, a sophomore or junior in high school. Someone who should have been worrying about grades and girlfriends and what he wanted to be when he grew up. Instead, he became another young black boy killed by gun violence before he ever got the chance to figure out who he really was. His family will never get to see him graduate, never get to watch him grow into the man he could have become, never get to celebrate his accomplishments or support him through his struggles. All three families are united in grief, and they're united in their demand for justice. But justice in cases like this is complicated. Even when suspects are identified, prosecuting gang-related murders is difficult. Witnesses are often too afraid to testify. Physical evidence, while important, isn't always enough to secure convictions. And in cases involving multiple perpetrators, determining who is most culpable, who actually pulled the trigger versus who drove the car or provided the weapon, becomes a legal puzzle that can take years to sort out. That's assuming everyone involved is even caught, as investigators have indicated. They believe multiple people were involved in the August 18th shooting. Rekeymia Henley is just one piece of the larger puzzle. Her alleged boyfriend, the young man who went silent on social media after murders, has still not been publicly named or charged. Other potential accomplices remain in the shadows. The community of East Macon, meanwhile, continues to struggle with the aftermath. The violence on August 18th wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern that has claimed dozens of lives in Bibb County over the past few years. In 2024 alone, the county recorded more than 70 homicides, most involving young people under 25. That's a staggering number for a city the size of Macon. It represents generations being lost, families being destroyed, communities being traumatized over and over again with no end in sight. District 3 Commissioner Stanley Stewart has called for intervention, for churches and schools to step up, for gun buyback programs, for community-based solutions to break the cycle of retaliation that keeps claiming lives. But those solutions require time, resources, and sustained commitment. And in the meantime, young people keep dying. The sad reality is that the shooting on August 18th has probably already inspired plans for more retaliation. Someone lost a brother, a cousin, a friend. And in street culture, that loss demands a response, which will lead to another shooting, which will lead to more funerals, which will lead to more retaliation. It's a cycle that feels endless, and cases like Rekeymia Henley show just how far that cycle can reach, pulling in not just the shooters and the victims, but also the people connected to them, girlfriends, family members, friends who made one bad decision and now face life-altering consequences. Rekeymia's story is a tragedy layered upon tragedy. A young woman who grew up without a father because her mother killed him in self-defense, who overcame that trauma to graduate with honors, who seemed to be on a path towards something better, and who now finds herself wanted for triple murder, whether she fired a single shot or not. Her mother, Corinthia Henley, must be living through her own nightmare right now. She worked hard to push her daughter toward success, to help her overcome the violence that had marked their family. She posted proudly about Rekeymia's graduation, about her determination, about her bright future. And now her daughter is a fugitive, wanted, possibly in danger, facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. For Corinthia, This must feel like history repeating itself in the cruelest possible way. She took a life in what was ruled self-defense. Now her daughter is accused of being involved in taking 3 lives in what appears to be a planned execution. The generational trauma is undeniable, and it raises painful questions about how cycles of violence perpetuate themselves, how they mark families, how they shape the choices young people make even when they're trying desperately to escape. As this case moves forward, as Rekeymia is eventually found, as other arrests are made, as the legal system processes what happened on August 18th, the people of Macon will be watching closely. They'll be watching to see if justice is served, if the families of Quantaries, Brandon, and Markel get the accountability they deserve. They'll be watching to see what happens to Rekeymia Henley, whether she's treated as a co-conspirator who deserves the harshest punishment, or as someone who made a terrible mistake and deserves some measure of mercy. They'll be watching to see if this case changes anything, if it sparks real conversations about violence prevention, about breaking cycles of retaliation, about giving young people better options in the streets. But mostly, they'll be remembering 3 young men who lost their lives too soon. Quantaries Townsend, 27 years old, a son, a friend, a presence in his community who will be missed. Brandon Thomas, 21 years old, a brother, a young man with his whole life ahead of him. Markel Bonner Jr., 16 years old, still a child, still figuring out who he was, still deserving of a future he'll never get to have. These 3 young men mattered. Their lives had value. Their deaths weren't just statistics. They were loved. They are mourned. And they deserve to be remembered as more than just victims in a crime story. Rest in peace, Quantaries. Rest in peace, Brandon. Rest in peace, Markel. You were loved. You mattered. Your families haven't forgotten you. Your community hasn't forgotten you. And as this case unfolds, as justice slowly works its way through the system, your names will be spoken, your stories will be told, and the people responsible for taking you from this world will be held accountable. To the families grieving these losses, no words can ease your pain. No arrest will bring your loved ones back. But please know that your sons, your brothers, your family members are not forgotten. Their lives meant something, and the fight for justice in their names continues. To Rekeymia Henley, wherever you are, turn yourself in, get a lawyer, tell your story. Face what's coming with whatever courage you can muster. Running only delays the inevitable and puts you in more danger. Your family wants you safe. Your community wants answers. And you deserve the chance to defend yourself in court rather than being hunted in the streets. And to the young people watching this video from Macon, from Atlanta, from small towns and big cities across America, this is what happens when violence becomes the answer. This is what the cycle of retaliation looks like. 3 young men dead. A young woman's promising future destroyed. Families torn apart. A community traumatized. There are other ways, other paths, other choices. Don't let loyalty to a crew or a relationship pull you into something you can't come back from. Don't let one bad decision define the rest of your life. Because once bullets fly, once bodies drop, once that line is crossed, there's no going back. The only thing left is grief, guilt, and the grinding machinery of the justice system. Learn from this tragedy. Break the cycle. Choose differently. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where do you stand on this case? Was Rekeymia a victim of circumstance or an active participant? What needs a change in communities like Macon to stop this cycle of violence? And if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. These stories matter. These lives matter. And by watching, by engaging, by caring, you're helping make sure they're not forgotten. Until next time, stay safe out there.